For that lovely introduction, and thank you all for being here early in the morning after that awesome dinner last night. So thanks. As I just was lovely introduced, I'm a designer at UC18, but this is not about what I do on a day-to-day basis, but about kind of my motto of what design is. And I think design is communication. It's about getting information across from one person to the other. And I want to show you how I came to this conclusion and what it could mean for you. So before we dive into what I think that design is, we should talk about what other people see as design. And obviously, this is just going to be my impression, but maybe you have the same impressions, maybe you have some different ideas. I want to look at how design is perceived from the outside. So what do people that are not in our industry say about design? Because as a designer, I obviously speak about design a lot. I talk to a lot of people about what I do. And if I tell them I'm a designer, this is what I'm hearing. Design is pretty. You're just painting pretty pictures. You're doing something beautiful. You're trying to make maybe the work of an engineer look great. Maybe. Design is weird. I mean, I don't even know what this is personally. This could be a couch, possibly. And I don't really know if I want to sit on it, to be honest. But if you show that to anyone, they're going to be thinking designer. I have a couch at home, and it's really comfortable, but nobody's ever said this is a designer couch. And design is perceived as art, as making things visually and aesthetically pleasing. This is seen as a popular design sculpture in Berlin. And design is really weird. It may be impractical. Probably most of you know this. This is the famous lemon squeezer from Alessi, designed by Philippe Starck and popularized by Don Norman. And it may not be the most practical way to squeeze a lemon, but it's probably, you're probably thinking designer must have done that. And design is fashion, obviously. There's fashion designers, they're rock stars in a way, and what we think when we see weird, uncomfortable clothes or stuff that doesn't make any sense, walk through the runway, it's designer. And, well, this is weird for me because I have a different view. This is uncomfortable, but it doesn't really matter because it's not important that everyone has the same passion about this field as I do. But I want to spend a minute looking at what our industry thinks of design. And by our industry, I mean field of UX and tech. He looks really designer, doesn't he? So the way many of the people I know and work with think about design is design's a process. This is the double diamond. You probably know it by heart. And it's a religiously followed process to get to your idea, and there's nothing wrong about that. But it's also a craft. It's blood, sweat, and tears. It's putting in hard work and overnight hours and like working your butt off to do something amazing. And it's post-its, it's writing on things, and it's putting things on the wall and rearranging things and getting a group of people together from different departments. This is design as well, and it's doing the deliverables. It's working on the bits and pieces and putting them all together and making the executive work of building screens and artifacts to actually make a great digital product. But above all of this, design seems to nowadays be about discussions. If you live in any way, go through the internet, live in Medium, you're going to see weird posts about people just discussing over what kind of title for design they should have. If it's UI or UX, or if it's a slash in the middle and it's really bad because that doesn't make any sense. If you're an interaction designer, you're only thinking about clicking a button, but I'm thinking much bigger and you're not doing your job right. And it becomes weirdly about titles and not about actually the impact we're doing. And I see that a lot. And what freaks me out most about this is that it seems like at the end, most of these articles or discussions come to the conclusion that we should just be called designers, period. And that doesn't make any sense because there's a special field of design we're working in, and saying we're just designers means all design is digital and making the same mistake as the public by ignoring other important fields of design and just saying we're the most important ones. And I find that troubling. So why am I actually here to talk to you about this? It matters because of a few things. In a way, it creates a sort of cognitive dissonance, like a tension between what we think we should do and what we're actually supposed to do in our job, in our companies, what other people higher up the ranks may be thinking about what we do. Because the CEO may be a great designer, but they also maybe just have the view of all the other people we see outside the industry and don't really know what we can do. And in the end, we just end up making icons and just bitching about that we could actually change the world, but not doing anything to bridge that gap. And well, I speak so much about how I don't think we should talk about that much, but get to work. It seems like I think that semantics doesn't matter, but that's actually not true. I think semantics, the careful choosing of words, is deeply important because it lets us communicate to each other and it lets us get to a shared understanding. I think we just should spend that effort on something else and actually communicating with our users through words, if it makes sense, or with our other people in the department instead of just talking about design with designers for design's sake. Okay, just to give you an idea how I came to all of this and why I disagree with most of the things I just showed you, I want to give you a brief background on my story and how I came to my point of view, because it just makes more sense that way. This is me. We're in Lederhosen. I'm from a small town in the south of Germany. Still have one, not the same pair. And obviously I didn't know what I want to become when I grow up. My dad, who is a mechanical engineer working at Bosch on anti-lock braking systems and stuff like that, and he was super excited about his job. He came to talk to us about what he's doing, and our family is really engineering driven, so this was kind of the path I was supposed to go in. But it didn't really make sense to me because I felt like there was some human side missing. It was just interesting, but not enough. And I didn't really think becoming a mechanical engineer would be the right thing for me. Eventually, as I grew older, I became really interested in art, and I started painting. You can see some of that here. And art is great, but it is also a struggle. It tears me apart when I'm painting, and it's great when I've done something, but it's a pain doing it. And I always thought of design's really interesting, but I didn't really know what it was, what the different fields of it meant. And for me, design also was art. And I thought, I couldn't be doing something like that. This is an expression of myself. And if I need to do something on pressure for someone else, this will never work. This will just tear me apart. And so in the end, I was kind of lucky. I got into a program called media engineering. It was technical. It was sort of bit design. Seemed kind of okay, still not knowing what to do. And eventually I got a job at the Usability Engineering Center and learned about user testing, learned about doing research, learned about interviewing people and getting down to the human needs. And this really made sense to me. It kind of lit a fire in me that all these design things actually maybe making sense and maybe something I could go into. Okay, eventually what I did was work. I worked on a lot of different projects and was really lucky to do that. I worked on AR systems, I worked on design systems, I worked on designing for voice, illustrations, business design, service design, apps, websites, all of these things, and every time I started something, I had no clue what to do because I never learned this properly. But in the end, it always turned out okay, and through all these different fields, I kind of made up my own mind about what I think that design is and how to approach it. And that is, design is communication. It's basically always the same approach of communicating something in any field of design, and then just the specific techniques and mechanics of a certain domain that differs and that you have to apply to actually make the same outcome in a different area work great. And what I mean is design is exactly equals communication, so it follows the same processes, and I'm going to get into what that means. But really briefly, why communication? Communication is the process by which information is exchanged between individuals through a common system of symbols, signs, and behavior. And it's not just the exchange of information, but for humanity as a whole, it's the way or the reason why we were able to become the dominant species on the planet and actually build the society. Brief examples of kinds of communication. Written communication, first seen 40,000 years ago, was a way to outlast a person's lifetime and actually communicate knowledge throughout a lifetime and into the next generation to help us build knowledge. Spoken communication in the form of gossip helped us broaden the group because I now could know about people and their status that I didn't have the time to get to know personally through talking to someone else. And eventually, communication through symbols like money allowed us to collaborate across the globe with different people of different cultures, strangers I couldn't trust because I couldn't know them, but I could trust because we had the belief in a shared entity that made these things, the coins. And so, in a way, communication helped us get to where we are right now. And I think if you look at that, that's also already a thing, a kind of design that they put into to achieve that. Okay. But let's break down what communication actually is and how communication happens. That is you. You're the sender. You're trying to get a message out. You want to communicate something. And on your own, it's going to be pretty hard. Obviously, you need a receiver. You have someone you know, you have some kind of relationship to them, you understand who they are, what they like, and how they like to communicate. And you form a message, something that would resonate with them because you know them, something that would be of interest to them, and something that you want to get off your chest and just communicate to the other person. Okay. Then you need to encode your message. So somehow you have this thing in your head and you're getting it out through some kind of maybe technical encoding, like you can see here. It can be just the idea of making sound waves by speaking something. And you need a medium, something to transmit your message. Again, can be air, right? Like right now, can be sending the signal from the microphone to the other person. And in that process, there can be noise. You can distort the signal. There can be outside influences distorting it. And eventually, you want the receiver to be able to decode it and to receive your signals and get the message from that. And if that works, the receiver understands your message, understands the meaning behind the message, and ideally, because you as a sender know what kind of message resonates with the receiver, you want to achieve a change in behavior. And if all of this works, we're going to have successful communication. So there's a few things that can go wrong with this. And one is the technical problem. That's noise, that's losing the signal through transmission, and that's mostly solved. We don't really have big problems in technology by losing signals anymore, at least like looking at the internet. Sure, that happens, but you can't really plan for it. But the other two are really important, and that's the semantic problem. Does the receiver understand what I meant by the message? So is the meaning conveyed? And the effectiveness problem, does the message resonate with the receiver and actually help change their behavior and affect their behavior in the way that it's supposed to be? And these kinds of problems happen due to certain barriers in communication. And these communication barriers, there's a lot more. I just listed the few that are most important to us, and these are things like physiological barriers. Is the receiver maybe ill, has trouble concentrating, has a hearing impairment, just cannot really get the message you're trying to send to them? Or cultural barriers, is there a different understanding of certain signs and signals? Like in most parts of the world, shaking your head means no. In certain few countries, shaking your head means yes. That's an easy example of cultural barriers to communication. Then there's linguistic ability. Am I using words the other person may not understand, or slang or something? And then there's an important factor that's just domain knowledge. So does the receiver understand the medium, the channel that I'm sending the message on, and are they skilled enough in that to decode your message? And I'd like to get to a quote that I really like by Tony Robbins, and that he says, to effectively communicate, we must realize that we are all different in the way we perceive the world, and use this understanding as a guide to our communication with others. And I think that really brings it to the point neatly, and also should remind us of the basic principles we think about when designing, because looking for diversity and understanding our users is exactly that. Okay, so now let's get a little less theoretical, more practical. How do we communicate through design? This is an example of how we communicate through design. The sender wants to get a message to the receiver. They know what they like and what kind of message would resonate with them. So he uses his skills in a certain domain, that domain being shoes here, to encode a certain message, coming up with a product. The receiver understands the message, it resonates with them, and they're off dancing. Other example, more in our domain, same thing. Sender wants to get a message out, medium being an app here, and they design and program and use their skills in the domain to encode the message they're trying to get across. And the user on the other side has a certain domain knowledge and knows how to decode the message they just received. All good. So when thinking about communication through design, there's three things that you should really keep in mind. And these things are affordances, values, and content. And I'm going to get into what each of these mean. Affordances is something you can communicate, and it means what a person can do with a certain object or a piece of design or a thing you communicate. So affordances are individual. It's based on the person receiving the communication, because they can be different for everyone. And what's really important is perceived affordances. So do they actually understand what they can do with it by looking at it? Then there's values. That's mostly what the thing says what kind of image, what kind of ideals it portrays, and also what kind of ideals it wants to portray to the user, but also what the user wants to portray to others by having something. So it can be, look at me, this is really cool. And then there's content. Things like information that is displayed is also a really important part of communication. Okay, this seems really abstract told like this, so let's look at some examples. And I'm just giving you my impression because, as I just told you, communication is personally different based on the receiver. So I'm the receiver here. Maybe you have a different idea, but let's see how it goes. This is a chair, I think. And what this communicates to me, basically, is first affordances. It tells me I can sit on it. It's probably gonna hold me. Then there's this weird angles on the sides of the legs, and this tells me, at least, I used the chair like this before, I can stack a few of them on top of each other and it's gonna be bigger and use less space. And then it looks kind of light, so I think I can pick it up, and there's an affordance. Then it does communicate some values. It seems, at least to me, rather cheap. Maybe that's a good thing because I don't have that much money to spend. And it seems like it can stay out in the rain and I don't have to worry about it, so kind of durable. And it doesn't communicate any content, at least not to me. Different thing. Anyone know what this is? It's a shoe. Weirdly enough, but I would say affordances is not the #1 priority of this shoe. Image is. You want to say, look at me, I'm really fashion forward, I'm really eccentric, and I really know what I'm doing, and I'm probably spending a ton of money on this shoe. Affordances may be the second thing, but by far behind, because somehow you see you can get your foot in here and your heel over there and maybe it's gonna hold you. I don't really know. Still no content here. Then this is a copy of Wired magazine. I think it's pretty clear they want to communicate content above all else. That's what they do, trying to keep content relevant to you, trying to make it appealing so that you might buy the magazine. But on top of that, they want to communicate an image of being technology friendly, of being forward thinking, of being innovative, of being cool. And if it's a physical magazine, it at least would communicate to me that I can open it, browse through it, etc. Then this is an example by UC. We did a customer journey, and this just mainly communicates content. There's not really that much image to it. There's mostly about getting the information that's in there across to the person. And that's not outward-facing communication, but inward-facing communication, and design is following the exact same principles. Then there's something more in our domain. It's by Google Trips, the onboarding, and let's look at what this is communicating. It's got 3 dots here. I'm a designer, I know that means this is swipeable and communicates an affordance. But this may not be the same thing for everyone. If you're a novice user and you don't really may know that you can do that, then there's buttons. I think I can click them. There's some content, which is probably the most important thing here because it tries to explain to me what this thing can do. And then there's some images. Maybe you could say they're trying to convey content, but mostly it's about the values that they're trying to communicate. And this is supposed to feel really light, it's supposed to feel really friendly, it's supposed to feel fun, and it's supposed to feel really easy. Okay, so if you think about using this model of communication and what you can communicate for work, let's look at a simple example I put up. So say redesign research. Probably tons of people have had the situation where they had a website and they had to redesign the search experience for that. And what happens in most cases is that you think, great, let's make it really pretty, let's make the things flow in nicely, let's make the bars spin around, and let's show them we're thinking about things, let's have a loading animation and things pop up. And eventually, you may end up with something like this. This is just an example of a Facebook redesign I drew from the internet. But it looks really pretty. I can't doubt that. And probably there's some spinning animations and some subtle fading and stuff. But if this is design in search, then why does the most popular search on the planet look like this, which is arguably a lot less pretty? So to answer this question, let's look at a simple canvas here that you can use if you want to frame your communication for a given project. So you would start with your communication goal. So what is the thing that you're actually trying to say with your piece of design? Let's say, just taking a guess here, you want to communicate the information that is most relevant to the user and make it easily accessible. What do you think? Does it make sense to you? Okay, let's say it does. Then, given that, you can derive the priorities and the hierarchy of the three types of communication. And I say, information is the #1 thing mentioned here. So content is probably #1. And then I say, make it accessible, so that for me means affordances, and that has me end up with values on #3. And then we can fill this in to get an idea about what are the types of things we want to communicate in each of these areas. And I want to communicate relevant results to the user. That's my #1 priority in content, which is the #1 priority. Then a few others. What's also really important is accessing relevant results. So making sure that the user can actually get to the results you're showing them. This is an affordance. And #3, reflect brand image, which is something I think that probably makes sense in this context. But this could be something else. Like if you say, you want to be your search to be fancy, and you want to have your search be your #1 thing people see, you want to have it be cool, be innovative, be flashy, totally fine. Then put it in there. But probably, if you're following a similar train of thought, then it's still going to be #3, and it's not going to be your top priority to make it really pretty. And so looking back at our example, what we can see here is there's a ton of thought and design work going into getting you the right results. And this is something we as designers tend not to jump at, working with engineers to figure out what are relevant results and how do I show relevant results. And what is the kind of teaser text I'm going to show that make this result more relevant to you. Instead, we just make it pretty. And then there's this clear separation of different types that hopefully helps with that. And the obviously blue links that may not look really great, but they tell everyone you can click there and access your results. This is how you get there, and this is why this works. Common problems, like the ones I showed you before, that happen in communication are, one, the sender, that could be user designer, may not be really skilled in the domain. And this is something that sometimes happens, that you just aren't really good at encoding the message and working with the domain, but I don't think that applies to us here, because we probably know what we're doing. Instead, the other two become really important, and that maybe the receiver can't decode the message. Maybe they're not as skilled in this domain as we thought they were. Maybe we didn't really understand the person we're designing for well enough to know what kind of message they can decode. Or the message doesn't resonate, and this comes back to the same thing. Maybe we didn't really know what they need and what they want us to tell them, and what message would actually help them change their behavior. And one thing to consider here, just as a side note, is a recent study by Nielsen Norman, which analyzed the computer skills over top wealthy countries like Germany, most of Europe, US, etc. And this is what they found, is that people really aren't as good with computers as we think they are. You are in that top 5%. Hell, even you may be in the top 1%, because the 5% level 3 is just doing some vaguely complicated tasks with a few steps. And us, we're experts, but we tend to think of us instantly as the user, or let's say we're designing for a broad audience of all the people that says, okay, if it's all the people, that includes me, I'm kind of a person, and so I can just as well do something I really like and make it really great. But what we tend to forget is that this excludes so many people that don't have the skills. And if you're good at math, you may have added this up and noticed there's something missing, and that's a whooping 26% who have close to no computer skills at all. Which was shocking to me, but it's something we should really keep in mind whenever we're designing something. So when things go wrong, it may look something like this, and this happens quite often. You, as the receiver, may not really know the message or get the message wrong. You may not have the relationship to the receiver you need to understand what kind of message would resonate with them. So you're getting your message wrong. Then maybe you're in a rush, not saying you're bad at your job, but your boss is screaming at you, and you just have to get this over with, and you're just doing the quickest thing, and maybe have some errors in your encoding. Then have it transmit through the medium, being an app maybe. The user can be sick and is really in a bad mood. His head is full and can't really concentrate on anything. And this leads to, they barely see what you're writing there. They have trouble reading it. It's complicated and long, and they can't understand it. And in the end, maybe missing the domain knowledge because they're not as skilled as you thought they were. So it means they're not getting your message and end up really frustrated. And this is what we're trying to avoid. Because in the end user experience is nothing more than successful communication, having the receiver get a message that they understand, can decode, and that resonates with them, gets them to change their behavior and gives them a good feeling. So this is what we should aim for. So to slowly wrap it up, let's recap briefly how you would go towards framing communication. And this may seem really familiar to you, which would be really good. Understand your audience, number one. What do I mean by that? Obviously doing research, but this, for me, doesn't end at the point where you say, okay, I looked at the numbers, and our audience is 16 to 42 years old, mostly from Europe, mostly male, maybe 60% to 40% female. Got it, understood. I know what to design for. No, it goes to the point where you know, you have a clear understanding of the person you're talking to. Like, imagine you met someone at this conference, and at some point after talking to them for a while, you know, okay, if I will reach out to them in half a year, what kind of channel am I using? What kind of language am I using? What kind of things would I address to them? And what kind of message would maybe resonate with them? So how would we stay in touch, and actually, how would I get a response from them because I put something out there in a meaningful way that makes sense to them and they have a value from? Okay, so once you reach that, you want to define your message. So both, what do you want to say to them, and what makes sense from their perspective. This should be the #1 priority. Obviously, you want to affect their behavior in some way, so you should know what kind of message would resonate with them. Then the fun part, encoding in the medium, for at least I think that's kind of fun, actually. Getting your ideas and the things you want to have and communicate out there and actually build something really cool, like this heart, which looks really cool. And eventually this gets out, you release a product, and the people receive your product, and you want to measure reception. So get to know how well the message was received. So doing, again, analytics, research, to figure out, did they get your message? Did they understand what you're trying to tell them? Or were there problems in this communication? Were there problems in their abilities? Maybe they were not skilled enough. Were there problems in your abilities? Maybe you didn't encode it right. Maybe you made some mistakes while encoding it in the medium. Or maybe it's just the message that's plain wrong, and getting down to these levels really gets you a good idea of how to iterate either your message or your encoding to make it work for your audience. And with that, I just want to say, basically you can design everything. And what I mean by that is, once you understand that design is a process, not necessarily like the innovation process or whatever. I mean, they're valid, but abstracting it even more to the point of the process of communication, where the only thing that's differentiating a digital designer from a furniture designer is the skills and the things they've learned about how to apply certain methods and techniques in their respective domain. And these techniques combined communicate some of the things that I told you before. How do you communicate values? How do you communicate affordances? And how do you communicate content in a certain medium? And once you get to learn these techniques, you can do that systematically. You don't need to be really creative to do that. You can actually design anything. And I want to leave you with a quote by George Bernard Shaw that I really like, and I think brings that to the point. Whenever you've designed something and you're really sure that the user is gonna get what you mean, and I did this is great, they're gonna love it. Think about that quote. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. Thank you.